Last summer, 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team were acquitted of sexual assault. TSN's Rick Westhead covered the trial and broke the story in 2022 about an incident in a hotel room in London, Ontario, and Hockey Canada's secret slush fund used for a settlement with the victim. Westhead's new book is We Breed Lions, Confronting Canada's Troubled Hockey Culture. And joining me from Toronto is Rick Westhead. It's great to see you.
Hi there.
Now, I know you knew many details about what happened in that hotel room prior to the trial, but you did sit through the entirety of the trial. How disturbing did you find it?
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, at the end of the day, after 2 months, after effectively 2 mistrials where 2 juries were dismissed, a judge ruled that the Crown had not met its burden of for a conviction, and so she acquitted the 5 players. And not only that, she said that she found that there was actual consent, that she did not find EM, the complainant in this case, to be credible or reliable. That said, the National Hockey League came out and said after the fact that the actions of the players, what happened in that room, was wrong, was unacceptable. And we know that the 5 players who were charged are still facing bans by Hockey Canada. So, I guess one lesson that we take away from this is that our court system, we respect judgments, of course, but we also recognize that the courts don't judge people based on morality.
Yeah, to be clear, they were tried and they were found not guilty. But those 5 players were the ones who went on trial for it. There were other players in the room that night. Do you think they bear any responsibility for what happened?
I think, the way I wrote in the book, if I was the parent of, one of these players, I would be deeply ashamed. I dropped off my own son at university in September, and my last words to him as he goes into his first year of school were that, if he sees something that doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, that he should say something, that he should be a protector of young women. And he should go, if he sees a situation where a young woman's with young men, go over and ask if she's okay. And, and don't be a bystander. Don't just say, I'm not going to get involved in that, but actually be proactive and make sure she's okay. So, it's interesting. There's so much focus on this trial in London this past summer, but it's only one of many anecdotes. Since I started reporting on this case, in particular in London in May 2022, I know of at least 6 other former players from major junior hockey who are now either convicted or pleaded guilty to allegations of sexual assault. There are many more in minor hockey, issues of hazing of a sexual nature and abuse and maltreatment. And that's, of course, not even taking into account the many cases that aren't reported in the media either.
And that's the thing. Your book reminds us that this is just one of a number of scandals involving hockey players. There was Graham James, David Frost. There was a coach with the Chicago Blackhawks. What overall does it say about hockey's culture that these things happen again and again?
Well, one of the things that I tried to do was make sure that these examples and anecdotes in the book are also current. It would be far too easy for people to dismiss this if the stories in this book were only from the 1990s or early 2000s, right? So I wound up interviewing 58 junior hockey players who either played Tier 2 junior or major junior hockey in the last 10 years. And so there are so many stories in this book from these players about peer pressure and the pressure to conform, to be accepted when you're a first-year player, the drinking to excess, 16-year-olds drinking so much, the pressure for them to have sex and to talk about it with their teammates, and just the way that in some cases players are really objectified by their teammates. And when that's happening, when players are being objectified, should anyone be surprised when later on they wind up objectifying young women?
Yeah, you point out that a lot of these hockey players, they leave home when they're 16. They go to another city to be a junior hockey player. These 16-year-olds are playing hockey, in often cases, with 20-year-old young men. Why is that a bad combination?
Well, it's just like we talked about it a minute ago, that the pressure to conform, the 16-year-olds are so desperate to be accepted, and the 20-year-old veterans know they have power. I've heard a lot of disturbing stories in this book, but I should also point out, I also heard stories about people who said they wound up with 20-year-old teammates who were great leaders, who made sure that things were going the way they should go in those locker rooms. And it must be said, hockey's an amazing game. I love hockey. Some of my best friends come from hockey. I play it 3 times a week. I coached my son through minor hockey. When he fought cancer through the pandemic, our hockey community was around us, supporting us in every way that they could. So not only do I recognize there's great people in hockey, I celebrate it. But two things can be true. You can have a game that's amazing and full of people volunteering and working who are great people, and also still have a sport that has systemic problems that must be confronted.
A number of NHL teams have hired women recently. There's a coach in Seattle with the Kraken. Hayley Wickenheiser is with the Toronto Maple Leafs. By hiring women, will it change hockey's culture a little bit?
Oh, I think so. I think these are progressive moves. Part of the issue here, and part of the reason the cycle has continued, is when teams are looking to hire coaches, they are drawing on men who are former players who've gone through all of these things, and so when they either see or hear about it happening on their own teams, maybe they're reluctant to report it because they think to themselves, "Hey, I went through that and I turned out to be okay." So, this is a widespread issue. I mentioned that I only looked at Junior A and Major Junior hockey. Imagine if this book was full of examples from Junior B or even Junior C hockey. Sheldon Kennedy's become a good friend, and he's a name that is obviously well known within hockey. And if you take issue with what I'm saying about, this idea that there are systemic problems, take it from Sheldon Kennedy. He says that these are absolutely systemic problems throughout Canadian hockey. And I hope that people in the game will read this book and give it a chance and maybe come away with something positive out of it.
I was a hockey dad too, and I remember years ago when my boys were playing hockey, I had to take Sheldon Kennedy's Respect in Sport program. Every parent on the team had to take this program. So this is dating back to the early 2000s. A lot of the hockey players from that era are now in the NHL. So even though we've tried to educate people, these things are still happening.
Yeah, you're right, and that program, best of intentions, but it's an online module, the one that you were talking about, you having taken, and truthfully, like if you look at how junior hockey does its consent training, many junior teams, if they do it at all, it consists of someone coming in from an organization that fights gender-based violence, and they'll come in during training camp for 1 hour every September and talk about this issue for an hour. Maybe show this video about consent featuring a cup of tea that is pretty popular and widespread. It's not enough. One of the examples I highlight in this book is the Peterborough Petes organization in the Ontario Hockey League. And what they did, they gave unfettered access to an Australian man named Luke Ben Veltson, who I interviewed. And Luke spoke to these players about healthy consent and masculinity. And he didn't just do it once in September. Like I said, they gave him complete access. So he was there in the locker room after practices, kicking around the arena. And by being there so frequently, he built up a trust. Players started to trust him. And that is what is required if you're going to reach a point where, teenagers are willing to be vulnerable and to actually talk and be open with somebody about the things they're navigating, maybe even the things they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a very thought-provoking book indeed. Thank you very much for telling us all about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on to talk about it.
Thank you. Rick Westhead's new book is We Breed Lions, Confronting Canada's Troubled Hockey Culture.